There we go. We're all set. Anytime you're ready, Liz, you can go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us for our AARP New Hampshire cooking series. I am delighted to be with you again. And for those of you who have not been to my classes, you're seeing this recorded in my kitchen studio here in my home in Hollis, New Hampshire, right in the historic center of town. I actually live in one of the oldest houses in Hollis, so it's a pleasure to bring you to my kitchen. It is near the beginning of April, spring is coming, and we are actually a week earlier than normally, and there's a good reason for that. I am expecting to be a grandmother for the first time, and my daughter's due date is next week. So I said to the ladies, please, can we do it a little bit early? So I'm delighted to be with you. I am on grandbaby watch. I'm actually going to be part of the birth, so that makes it even more exciting for me. And so next time we get together, I'll have some really, really good news to share with you. But for today, as I mentioned, we were talking a little bit in the chat. We are featuring recipes from the New Basics Cookbook. Before we get started, I'm going to take you to my website where you can find the recipes, and then we'll come right back and get started because we do have a lot to do. We may run over a little bit. Typically, my programs are about an hour. We're going to go a little bit beyond that, so I hope you can stick around. So let's go over. I'm going to share my website with you. It's thecreativefeast.com. And here you're going to find all kinds of information for you. I still do, I do online cooking demonstrations. So if you want to recommend me to a library or other organization, feel free to do that. All that information is here. You can find my calendar, and certainly our AARP programs are at AARP New Hampshire. If you look at our food and fun, this is where you're going to find recipes. Now, here's my recipe blog, but for you, I have created a page just for the cook along classes for AARP in 2024. You can also take a look at our class recipes from 2023. But let's click on 2024, and you're just going to scroll down to Tuesday, April 9th, and this is where you have our recipes. So the chicken Marabella, and then the chocolate cake from Silver Palate. So those are our recipes for today. Also, just so you know, next month we are doing Simply Delicious Chinese. So those recipes are there, and of course you can just go ahead if you want. You do have to register with AARP, and they will also send you the recipes. And then, of course, you're always welcome to look further down. I am an intermittent faster. I've been doing it for almost 8 years now. I love this lifestyle. Lots of information here for you. Recipes from my hometown. Here's some low carb information that might help you if you're going on a low carb journey. I think we can all benefit from that. So for those of you who are looking at your health again, how can you support a good, healthy diet? Low carb information is here along with the intermittent fasting. And then of course you can check out my chickens. We do have, I got chickens a few years ago. So all this photographs of my coop with my protected chicken runs, they're always fun to see. And then of course my edible garden. For those of you who live in the area, just so you know, my garden will be on tour on June 15th through the Garden Conservancy, which is a national organization. Many of you will have garden tours in your area too. So if you go to Garden Conservancy, you can find that out as well. And then of course, my kitchen remodel, and you can see how that all happens. So lots of information on the website for you. But right now it is time to get this show on the road. So you can hear the buzzing in the background. That is my oven. I have already prepared the chicken, and it is in the oven cooking so that it'll be ready for us before the end of class. Here's the cookbook, as I mentioned. This copy is my second copy because it's so well loved. For those of you who do not have the Silver Palate cookbook, while it is from the early 1980s, it has so many helpful tips and tricks, really great recipe ideas and menus. And someone said, I forget what the term she was, but fancy made simple or something like that. I just thought it was such a great term. This is a little bit fancy, but it is simply done. And their recipes are tried and true, which is the sign of a good chef who could make a recipe that's the same over and over and over again. And that's why I always recommend the Silver Palate Cookbook. I recommend Ina Garten's cookbooks. Martha Stewart's cookbooks are in that vein, and that they have carefully tested them. They need consistency, and they're always, always good. So you may have some favorites as well. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. The ladies will interrupt me so that I can answer them in real time. So this recipe, again, it's a little bit fancy because it uses ingredients that we wouldn't normally think of cooking with. I had never thought to actually roast something with olives in it, right? We're also combining prunes in this. Now, there are some adaptations to this recipe that you can make, substitutions. So I read, I saw that some people use apricots instead of prunes. Go right ahead. If you'd like to use dried dates, go right ahead. This is adding a sweet element to it. So one of your dried fruits is what you want to be using. You could use a combination of apricots and prunes if you'd like. It could be that your colors that you're looking for might be, you want a brighter color. So orange apricots would be really nice. It would brighten up the dish a bit. So that's something to think about. So far as the olives, these are large Spanish olives, but you could use Kalamata olives. You could use oil cured olives if you want. The olives are going to add a kind of little tart vinegary flavor to it, along with the capers. So that combination is there as well. But to get this one started, I'm going to do something a little bit extra. I am actually going to show you how to break down a whole chicken. Now, you can certainly, in the place, you can always buy a chicken that's already been broken down. You can buy chicken thighs if you'd like. I think that would be a wonderful substitution. Just make sure that the pounds number that you're using is correct. So, we're looking at, 3 to 4 pounds or something like that. So you want to make sure that that is an equal amount. Now, this recipe was calling for chicken quarters, but I'm going to go ahead and break this down, and we'll see how that goes. I just want to make sure that I want to look at my recipe. I like to have this in front of me just to make sure that I have everything all set. And so, yeah, she's got about 4 pounds, 2 chickens cut into quarters. So these are smaller chickens. This is a larger chicken. This is actually from a local farm here in Hollis. And so I was smart and I bought a bunch of chickens when she was processing them and stuck them in my freezer. So this is probably about a 5-pound chicken. So I'm going to show you how to break this down. So when we look at the chicken, we want to consider that we're going to break it. She has in the recipe breaking into quarters. I'm just going to break this up into pieces, leaving the carcass behind that I'll freeze and then use for stock. So basically what we do is, I want to zoom in on this because I want you to see something to help you. This will help you to break this down. So let me see if I can bring the zoom in here. Okay, so when you look at this, I don't know if you can see, but right here, there's like a little line, and actually that's a line of fat. And so those are my guides when I'm going to break up my chicken. I look for those little lines of fat, and it really kind of helps me to break the chicken into pieces. So here, I'm going to just turn it in this direction because it's easiest for me. I'm going to take my knife and cut along that line of fat. Now, you want to make sure this is a boning knife. You want to make sure whatever knife you're using is very sharp because you're going to use very short, precise cut so that you don't cut into the meat, but that you do leave the skin on because the skin is all part of the flavor, okay? So I'm going to turn that over and I'm going to take my knife and come back to the skin. And notice too that when I slice like this, I'm slicing away from my body so that I don't, by accident, hit a snag and then pull the knife towards me. Now what I do is I simply press this like that, and the joint comes right apart, and it makes it so easy for me to cut that leg. So it's a leg and a thigh all together. And now we go on the other side, and we're going to do the same thing. Open this up. I'm looking for that line of fat that I can see, and then take my knife and cut through. Okay, so for everything you're going to do on one side, you do on the other. I want to reiterate that you don't have to do this. You can instead, if you want, just buy a quartered chicken at the grocery store. Keep the skin on because that is part of the flavor. You could also do this with just chicken thighs if you want. Could you do it with chicken breast? You can. I just don't think it adds as much flavor. It's nice to have also to have the bone in because that will add more flavor to the juices. Now I have my chicken breast that I'm going to cut down. This is the breastbone right in the center. This is the sternum. Okay. So we're going to cut on either side, and it's really easy to see. That's the breastbone right there. We can see that. So I'm going to take my knife and go on either side. Again, I am looking for where is that bone hitting, and I'm just taking the tip of my knife and I'm pressing it. Okay, so the bone is here. I'm pressing this side of the knife against the bone as I go down, and it helps me to make sure that I'm not cutting into the meat, but instead cutting against the breastbone, the ribs, and everything. And then I just very gently pull that aside. Okay. And then I can see that the breast meat goes down around here. So I'm pulling that open and taking the tip of my knife and moving that aside. Okay. And go all the way down. Yep.
We have a couple of people that are asking if you could like maybe just move the chicken up toward the camera just so they can see the view.
See the view. I mean, can you not see the chicken?
They can't see where you're cutting.
Oh, it's a little bit difficult. I can't move the camera, unfortunately, just because it's positioned in such a way. But
That's great. Just turning it like
doing
that's
that
helpful.
helps.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There we go. I'll try that for the next one. Okay. And
Yeah,
then
great.
this comes right off. And I like to keep the wings on until the end because they kind of hold the bird all together. All right. Now we're going to take this, again, the tip of my knife. And I kind of just scratch it a little bit against the breast bone and the rib. And there you go. My son came home for Easter, and he was in charge of Easter dinner, and he had never broken down a chicken before. So it was a lot of fun to do this with him. And I reassured him, listen, don't be hard on yourself. It takes practice in order to do this. But it is such an inexpensive way to learn, right? Because you're going to end up eating the chicken anyway. And then, you can follow, just try it over and again. And then you always have that carcass, which is you're going to freeze and make some amazing chicken stock. And then when you have a skill like this, then you can apply it to, if you buy lamb for a holiday or something like that, you can always apply it to, another type of meat that you might be buying. Okay, so I just thought it would be fun for you to see that. I'm going to go ahead and just put this to the side, and I'll worry about that later. I do want to check. I'm checking in my oven for just a second because, as I had mentioned to you, I do have this dish already in the oven. So I wanted to have that fresh for you. All right, now we're going to do the marinade. So I had already prepared this once, and I'm saving the bag. I love these big Ziploc bags for the purposes of marinating a lot of food at one time. So I just wanted to share that. And okay, so we do have that. So I'm just reusing this bag. Now, I'm going to make this dish, and I'm going to let it marinate for 24 hours, which is what I did before. If you marinated it for 12 hours, that should be fine. There's a lot of flavor in this marinade. And then I always tell people, if you really like that marinade, just know that most marinades can be made into salad dressings because it has all the similar ingredients. So let's look at our ingredients. We have red wine vinegar. Okay, so I'm going to add that. Now, you can replace the red wine vinegar with balsamic vinegar if you like. I did that in the first batch, so you can see it. It's going to be a very rich finish to it, but any kind of vinegar that you like, you can use. I just wouldn't use a white vinegar. Also, you want to use a good quality olive oil. I have an olive oil, and I always like to mix 50-50 extra virgin olive oil when I am baking or roasting, rather than frying or searing. So this, I actually used half extra virgin olive oil and half regular olive oil. You don't want to be using vegetable oils. We want those off our menus, out of our kitchens, and away from our diets. Okay, so you want to stick to these really great low processed oils like olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil. Those are the oils we want to stick with. Okay. Then we have, yep.
We have a question. Someone wanted to know, how do you clean the cutting board after you've cut the chicken on it? What's the best way to clean it?
Hot soapy water. I don't apply bleach to my boards anymore. I used to do that. I don't do that. I don't want those chemicals in my body. If you have a good, clean kitchen and you're just using a hot soapy water, that is the best way to clean your boards. I would never put the cutting boards in my dishwasher because they warp, especially if it's a wooden cutting board. Okay. All right. Now we have oregano. You can use fresh or dried. If you're using fresh, I believe the recipe calls for a half a cup. Let me just make sure I have that right. Yeah, or a quarter cup of dried. Now, what I recall about this recipe, that oregano flavor, I am not a big oregano fan, but in this recipe, it all works beautifully. It may seem like a lot, but remember, it is a marinade first, and that oregano is going to come out, and then it's going to come out finally in the cooking. And then we have our prunes. You're going to use about a cup of pitted prunes, or you could use apricots or a combination of both if you'd like. And then these are my Spanish olives. You could cut them in half if you want, but I like to leave them whole, less work. And yes, they do have the pimento in them. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. But you could use a Kalamata olive. You could use an oil-cured olive. Oil-cured olives will not have that vinegary brine to them, so you might enjoy that. And even those, I will leave the pits in because sometimes it's a pain in the neck to take the pits out, and I just remember it when I go to eat them. And then, of course, capers. So we're going to use half a cup of capers, and that's going in. And then we have 6 bay leaves. In that goes. And we have salt, a couple teaspoons of salt, and fresh ground pepper. Now that's it for our marinade. Now this would actually be really wonderful with pork as well. If you wanted to use, center cut pork chops, you could leave the bone in if you wanted to, or do boneless would be really nice. Just remember that the more meat that is exposed to your marinade, the more flavor you're going to have. Okay, so in goes all of my chicken. And like I said, I'm going to marinate this anywhere from 12 to 24 hours. I'm going to cook this off, and then I am going to package it up, freeze it, and that's going to be for my daughter and son-in-law for the first week of when the baby is home and they're going to be super busy. Whoops, this is not feeling right. We'll get that. Okay, and I was teasing them because they picked the right person to be on the baby staff because I'm actually cooking for everybody. Where the baby's going to be born at a birthing center, and we have a team of about 5 people involved. And so I'll be cooking meals for everybody, you know, as needed. So I'm going to have some really tasty things for them. So there's my chicken in that bag. You can put it into a bowl. You just want to be able to marinate that for, you know, like I said, 12 to 24 hours. I'm going to leave that there, wash my hands, and we'll get on with the next part. Did we have any questions about that recipe? I'm sure you could all see how incredibly simple that was. We left out the wine and the brown sugar because that is going to be added at the time of cooking. And I do have a little information about that. Someone earlier asked the question, how can you reduce the sugar? So one of the things that I like when I see a recipe, this recipe was actually featured in New York Times Cooking. And so I found it and I started to look at the notes from people who had prepared the recipe. And the consistent note about this chicken Marabella was that the recipe as written has calls for 1 cup of brown sugar, but people reduced that in half and they were very happy with it. So right there, you can cut back on your sugar intake. So I'm just going to grab this out of the oven and wow, this looks unbelievably fantastic.
So Liz, if I could just ask a couple questions.
Yeah,
Somebody was asking that after you put the chicken in the marinade, can you put that in the freezer and cook it later?
you can, actually, you can. And I have done that for other recipes as well. So that's a nice way at the last minute, you know, just in time to thaw it out. You can pull it out. It's already been marinating. But I would let it marinate after it's thawed out for at least, you know, 4 or 5 hours because you want to give it that time where the, you know, the marinade gets into the meat. So one thing you could do is you could marinate it for 12 hours, then stick it in the freezer. You might consider doing something like that. Okay, on either end, whether you let it actually sit once it's thawed to marinate in that for the 12 hours on either side. Okay,
And then
but look at, yeah.
2 other quick questions. One was, what was the quantity of the olives? And then somebody asked whether there was garlic in the marinade.
Oh, my mistake. I did, yes, and I actually have, I forgot about the garlic. It's an entire head of garlic. And so basically, if you want to, I'll show you what I did was I just broke that up. Thank you for catching that. And I just took the entire head and took the skin off and then put it in the food processor. And that was the garlic for this. And it's not overwhelming because it's cooked in the oven. Now this I cooked in the oven. I raised the temperature up a little bit so that it would cook in, you know, plenty of time for our class. I'm going to stick it back in the oven, just lower it, lower the temperature. And that will help to remove, you know, some of the wine. Once you marinate, put your ingredients in here, pour in a cup of white wine, and then you sprinkle brown sugar on top of the chicken. That's why you see the chicken is just so beautifully browned. Let me see if I can bring in my, zoom in on that. So you can see how beautifully browned the meat is. And that's partially from the brown sugar. The juices have reduced by close to half. I'm going to pop this in there just to give it a few more minutes so that that will finish up. And then when it comes time to serve at the end of class, we'll do that. All right.
And what temperature did you cook it at?
I am cooking it at 425 because I wanted that browning. I'm going to reduce it now to down to my 350 to finish that off, or 375, again, so that the liquid will evaporate. But if you were to cook it at the 350, it would take the full almost 50 to 60 minutes to cook. I just wanted to push that along so that we would have that in plenty of time for our class. Okay. Again, I apologize for not adding the garlic in, but you can put it right in the food processor after you've taken the skins off, and then put all of that garlic in there. It gets nice and sweet through the roasting. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing I want to do is I am going to go ahead. I am starting up some rice. We're going to cook some rice to go along with this. You could do rice or polenta. So all I have is I have a pot with 2 cups of water, and then I'm going to add a cup of rice to it. And then I'm going to let the water come to a boil, put the rice in, lower it way down to a low simmer, and just let it sit untouched for 20 minutes. And then our rice will be finished. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to get started on our chocolate cake. Before we move on, do we have any other questions about the chicken Marabella that I can answer?
Well, I guess a couple of people asked if you could just leave out the garlic.
You can, and I know that some people are allergic to garlic, but you know, I just think that these ingredients are together and they marry so beautifully. The garlic is not going to be too strong, but if you want to reduce the garlic, that would be another option for you. But I know I have friends who do have they are allergic to garlic and onions, so that's something that I think is very sad for them. But anyway, yeah, that happens. Any other questions?
I guess if you did the 350-degree temperature, how long did you say that would take? Was it about 50 minutes?
50 to 60 minutes. So the recipe that I've given you is the original from the book. Now, the other thing too is I prepared 1 chicken in a 12-inch cast iron pan. They're calling for 2 chickens. So you want to use a larger pan. The whole point is that you want your chicken to all be in a single layer in the pan. And then your marinade will go back on top. You're going to add in a cup of wine right before you put it in the oven, and you're going to sprinkle brown sugar on top. I just want to reiterate that the 1 cup of brown sugar on the recipe, I'm going to change that and drop it down to half a cup, because I just think it's just too much. And of course, the reviews that I read felt the same. Okay.
And then people are asking questions about the chicken doesn't marinate out of the refrigerator. It actually marinates in the refrigerator.
In the refrigerator. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. You always want, if you're going to be marinating poultry or anything like that for any length of time, you absolutely want to do it in the refrigerator. Now, if I were marinating, say I was going to marinate a steak, right? Like a nice big thick 1-inch, 1.5-inch steak. If I was going to marinate it for say half an hour or an hour, quite honestly, I would leave it on the counter covered, because it allows the meat to come up closer to room temperature so that when you're cooking it, it cooks very evenly. But that's a whole other ball game to talk about. So for this purposes of our recipe today, yes, marinate in the refrigerator, because it's for a long period of time. You don't want to leave that on the counter.
Thank you.
All right. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm buttering my bundt pan for our cake. All right. I find that melting the butter and brushing it on the pan is the best way to assure that you don't have any cake sticking in the pan afterwards. So that's, you know, probably about a tablespoon or so of butter. And I'm just going to put that there. And I am going to grab a little bit of extra flour, because I'm going to flour this. So tip that pan. Make sure that you don't see any matte finish. You want a nice shiny finish that tells you that you got the butter everywhere. Okay, because we are using chocolate in this, and we don't want this to stick. All right, and up the sides. Now, you can also make this cake in a regular springform pan. If you want, you know, with the tube pan with the spring, where the bottom pops up, like an angel food pan, or you could make it in two round 9-inch round cake pans or square cake pans. So you can do either. I like the way my bundt pan looks. I'm just going to grab a little bit of flour so we can flour that. Always want to flour it because it's going to give it a nice, easy release. All right. And I see that our water is boiling. Not ready to go over to the stove yet, but I do want to drop in. I just want to make sure that I have rice ready for the end of class. So off the camera a little bit, I'm just adding our rice in, and I'm going to put this on a very low simmer for 20 minutes. It's a real surefire way to get your rice cooked. So we're going to do that for just about 20 minutes. Now, with the flouring of your pan, take a nice handful and pop that in.
Someone is
And
asking
then,
which,
yes.
someone is asking which chocolate recipe in the book is the one you're using. So does that mean that maybe there's more than one?
Well, yes, actually, this one is from their first book, but it's also available on the New York Times website. And that's why I've given you the recipe so that you have that. You don't need the book. But it's actually from their first book, first Silver Palate cookbook. Now I'm just banging the edge of my pan against the edge of my sink, getting out that extra flour. So it's just floured all the way around. Okay, so now our pan is ready, and we're gonna go ahead and get started on our cake mix. So let me just get over to that. Okay, so our cake, we're going to, let me just zoom out. So we're going to first, for the cake, we're going to get our chocolate melted. So this is a really easy cake recipe to put together. You don't even need to have a mixer, which is really kind of nice. It's really, you can make it with a spoon and a good bowl. So first off, we're going to melt our butter. Okay, so we have about a stick of unsalted butter. When I'm cooking, I worry less about salted versus unsalted, but when I'm baking, I usually want to do unsalted butter because I don't want to add any too much extra salt to the recipe. So this is unsalted butter, and that's going to go into our, oh, I'm sorry, it's going to stay in our bowl. Oh, this is for the, sorry, that is for our frosting. Okay, so we have that, and then we're going to cut our baker's chocolate. So this is 4 ounces of baker's chocolate. We're going to cut that into smaller pieces so that it melts more quickly. I'm just boiling some water behind me. When you're cutting your chocolate, you want to use a serrated knife because it'll cut into those harder chocolate bars a little bit more easily. And then you're just going to break that up. Okay, again, if they're cut smaller, they will melt more quickly. Okay. They're going to melt right along with the butter. Okay, so there is our chocolate, and that's going to go into our bowl with our butter. All right, and then we're going to get our boiling water, and we're going to do a cup of boiling water. And we're going to pour it right on top. If you wanted to intensify this flavor, you could add hot coffee instead of just boiling water, and that would intensify the flavor even more. Okay, so that's going to go on top. And we're just going to let that sit for a few minutes. And that is going to melt that. We have what we're going to add to that is once we stir that together and it's nice and smooth, we have a teaspoon of vanilla extract. We have 2 eggs that have been separated. So I've got my egg yolks. We're also going to be using sour cream and a little bit of baking soda in the sour cream. And then finally, I'm going to be whipping the egg whites and we're going to gently fold that in to our recipe, into our batter. And then of course we do have our flour with our baking powder. Okay, so we have baking soda and baking powder. Do we have any questions before we go on?
Someone is asking whether you can taste the coffee flavor because someone doesn't like coffee.
So that's the interesting thing about adding coffee to chocolate. It's not that it tastes like coffee, it just intensifies the chocolate flavor and makes it just seem a little bit richer. You often find that in truffle recipes and some frosting recipes. I know that Julia Child recommends that in one of her favorite flourless chocolate cakes. So it's one of those little tricks that you can do, and people are like, what is it about this? What, you must have used a high quality chocolate. It's just that little bit of extra, coffee flavor. You might see a recipe that calls for espresso powder. That is adding that coffee flavor. Okay, I'm going to mix my baking soda with my sour cream, so that'll be ready to add in together. Okay, now we have this. We're going to give that a stir. This is melting that chocolate and our butter. Okay, just needs another minute or so. All right. And then we're going to sift our flour and baking powder and add that in once we get our egg yolks and our vanilla in there. While this is finishing up, I'm going to go ahead and get started on whipping our egg whites. So I'm going to use, I have this, I like it to use an immersion blender I have with a whisk on it. So in go my egg whites. Now we want these to be stiff but not dry. So we want to keep that in mind. All right. And let's see.
Can I just squeeze in a couple,
Yep.
couple questions? Yep.
Yep.
Can you use instant espresso powder in the boiling water?
You can. Yes. That would be a great trick to do.
And then what kind of chocolate?
I just used a baker's chocolate. So it's unsweetened. I think that's the key thing to remember, is that you're using an unsweetened chocolate because we're going to be adding 2 cups of sugar. Let me just put this egg whites off for a minute. So someone again asked earlier about lowering the amount of sugar in the recipe. So sugar has a lot to do with the texture of your baked items. So I would certainly give it a try by lowering this. You may want to lower it to like 1.5 cups of sugar to see how you like that, how this cake comes out for you. And then you can, try to do that if you wanted to go even lower. But it could eventually affect the crumble of the ingredients. So that's something just to keep in mind. All right, so I've added the sugar in here and that sugar has melted. I'm going to add in my vanilla. Did you have another question?
Yes. Is the yogurt Greek yogurt or regular yogurt?
This is sour cream, but you can use in its place yogurt. And I would use the Greek yogurt because of the texture, very similar to the sour cream. Either one would be fine. What they're doing is they're adding a wonderful rich moistness to the cake. But if you didn't have either of those, but you had whole milk, you could use whole milk. You want the fat, so these are all going to be full fat, not low fat. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Okay, so there's my sour cream. I'm going to add my eggs, my yolks one at a time. If you're using yogurt, you're going to get more of the sweet flavor will kind of diminish a little bit because the yogurt has more of a acidic kick to it. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But it will always add that richness to the cake, which is why that sour cream is in here. Okay, and now we're almost done with our batter. All of these little containers. So here is my flour and my baking powder. Okay, and she has, I think she has us doing a little bit of a sifting to add that in. Oh, not all gonna get in there, that's okay. Super easy. And then stir that in. Then what we're going to be doing is folding in our whipped egg whites. See, so you don't need a mixer. This is really easy to do. It's almost a no-fail chocolate cake, I'll have to be honest with you. And I am going to be freezing this once I bake it. And I've had it come out of my freezer 6 months later and still be really delicious. One thing I do like to stress in this particular recipe, it calls for a baking of 40 to 50 minutes. I pull it out at the 40 minutes. I find that the 50 dries it out just a little bit. So I like the 40 minutes for the baking time. Okay, now I'm just gonna stop for a second. I'm gonna pull our chicken out of the oven. Let that sit on the stove. Let you all admire that while we finish up with our cake. All right, so we've got that all mixed together. And now it's going to be time to do our egg whites. And I'm going to show you how to fold that. I'm going to move this into my larger bowl just so it's easier to fold those egg whites in. And then we'll do the frosting just so you can see how easily it comes together. Okay, so this I'm putting into the larger bowl just to make it easier to fold in my egg whites. All of that chocolate goodness out.
So Liz, the 40 minutes is at what temperature when you cook the cake?
It is at 350 degrees. So yeah, and all of that again is on the recipe for you. Okay, now we're gonna do our egg whites. So you're gonna have a little bit of a noise here. Again, we're going to do their egg whites. We're gonna whip them until they are firm, but not over dried. So just take some notice. What you're doing with your egg whites is you're pushing air into the egg whites, and that helps to give them lift, and that will help to lighten up the cake just a little bit. Now I just want to show you, so they're a little bit soft here. They're not standing up yet. Okay, so we're going to wait till they stand up. Okay, they're pretty much there. I think this I'm going to go one more round, and that's pretty much it. So let me just show you on my, I think I have, here we go. So here, they're not falling off. They're standing up nice and thick. That's exactly what we want. So now we're going to take just about a quarter of this and we're going to mix that in. This will lighten up the batter itself before we go ahead and fold in the egg whites. So just lightening it up a little bit. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and fold in the rest of the egg whites. This is one of those jobs. It's really kind of nice to have like a large rubber spatula. So I have a variety of rubber spatulas, the little ones, which I've really fallen in love with. You can get them at the grocery store now. I use them for everything, or a larger one. So what you do is you're going to take this and you're going to dive into the center, come underneath your batter and push it over on the top. And this is the motion that you're going to use. So basically this is kind of very gently folding it through and lifting and dropping so that it gets through evenly and you don't have any clumps of egg whites left over. You don't want to have that. Just lifting and dropping. If you stirred this, you would stir out all of that wonderful air that you popped into there. These egg whites are going to hold that lightness in with your batter. And that's pretty much it. I think we got almost all of that. I just don't want to see any trails. And there we go. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and I'm going to take my cake pan. Let me just get any extra flour out. There we go. I want to get that extra flour out because otherwise it'll be on top of the cake and you don't want that. All right. And then we're going to go ahead and just drop it in all the way around evenly. Again, you could do this into round 9-inch cake pans or 2 square 8-inch cake pans if you wanted. You could do it in an Angel Food cake pan, you know, that tube where the bottom comes out if you want, whatever you prefer. There we go. And then that is going to go into the oven, 350 for 40 minutes. So I'm just going to drop that in to my 350 degrees, set my timer for 40 minutes. And now we're going to go over to the stove. I'm going to show you how easy this frosting is to make. It's super easy. So all we're going to do is we're going to add our butter in. Okay, so we have about 2 tablespoons of butter. We have 6 tablespoons of heavy cream. Get another spatula here. Okay. You want to use heavy cream. That's going to add that fat. It's essential to, it's kind of like a ganache is what we're making here. We have our semi-sweet chocolate chips. Now you could change this to bittersweet if you like. But as you go bittersweet, or if you went dark, it's going to be less sweet. So if you're concerned about the amount of sweetness in this, you want to counterbalance that with the cake and you want a less sweet frosting, you can use a different type of chocolate, you know, depending on how much sweetness you want in it. And then we have vanilla, about a teaspoon of vanilla. And then we're going to go ahead and we've got confectioner's sugar. So we're going to, I do advise that you do, with the cocoa powder, put them both through the sifter because those tend to clump up a little bit and this will help to mix them in together. And it will make it so much, smoother frosting for you if you do that. And I can see that there's a bunch of stuff at the bottom here that is not quite going through. So that's when I take my fingers, and I'm glad that I did it. I just pushed those through like that. Okay. And there we go. All right. And then this is gonna go right onto the stove, all right? And I'm just going to put that over a moderate flame and just let it melt. We're not cooking it, we're simply melting it, okay? And you're gonna see how bright and shiny that is. And that is how simple that cake is and that frosting. Now, the other thing I want to tell you about that frosting is I like that frosting so much that I started making it on its own and using it to put on other cakes or vanilla ice cream. It's such a delicious, such a simple frosting. It's one of those recipes that you want to pass along to people if they have a question. Oh, I just need a chocolate frosting and I need it to be simple and easy. This is the one for you. All right, so let us plate up our chicken and then we'll come back to our frosting, give it a good stir so you can see it. And then I'm going to show you the finished cake because I did it yesterday so that we would have it today. Do we have any questions before I finish up?
We have a couple.
Good, okay.
One of the questions was, when you freeze the cake, do you freeze it frosted or unfrosted?
I like to freeze it unfrosted because the freezing could crack the frosting. So I definitely would just hold off on making the frosting till you're ready to do that. You know, again, it could be now, it could be, you know, a couple months from now, whatever you decide. But I would wait to frost it for sure.
And then there were several questions on different quantities, but I think if people can just refer to the recipe, they'll see the different quantities of cocoa and cream and.
Yes, yes, the recipe is right there for you. You know what? I'm going to put in the chat. I'm going to pop the link to the recipe one more time for you. And there it is. And don't forget that they're all there on the website for you.
That's great, thank you. And lots of people want to come to dinner.
Oh, well, that is always nice. I have to say, I'm really fortunate. You know, I love these classes and I'm having a great time with them, but you know, I used to travel, right? And so I used to cook for an audience and then everybody got to taste that. So I miss that very much. But recently, I and a friend of mine have been cooking for our local seniors. Once a month, we do a lunch. And I think this is going to be on the menu for April because it is such an easy thing to do for a large group of people. And it's really kind of special. And I know, you know, our seniors here in Hollis, they have Meals on Wheels provides a weekly lunch for them. And then my friend and I said, oh, let us do it once a month. And so this is the meal that all of the seniors make sure they come to. So I bet you a lot of them would remember the Silver Palate as well. Now here is my rice, just so perfectly cooked. Again, I cooked it in 2 cups of water, 1 cup of rice, brought it to a simmer, dropped it immediately, well, brought it to a boil, dropped it immediately to a simmer, 20 minutes with the lid on, done. Perfect rice. Guess what I'm having for lunch? Okay. All right. So let me take, oh gosh, this is just for our photograph. So let's put in a chicken breast and a leg. All right. And then I'm going to take the sauce. Now, what you can do is you can remove all of the goodies and take the sauce and reduce it in half. And that just means take everything out, cook down the sauce over a high flame, reduce it, and that will thicken it up a little bit. And that would be a nice way to thicken up the sauce. The other thing you could do is when you do that, when you've reduced it, take it off the flame. Remember, we're taking the chicken out. We put the pan back onto a flame. We bring it to a boil, reduce it by half, turn off your pan, and then take 2 or 3 tablespoons of very cold butter let it off the flame, just stir that in, and that will thicken up the sauce and give you a really rich, beautiful sauce that goes with it. So there is our chicken Marabella. And now I want to go ahead and take my chocolate cake and show you. I was not going to, oh, this is boiling. I was not going to frost it, and then I forgot. I got into a conversation with somebody, and before I knew it, I was frosting the cake. So I should have frosted it today in front of you, but anyway, I'm showing you, this is our wonderful frosting. I let it get a little too warm over there. I was not paying attention, but here we are. You can see how it comes together so beautifully. And I am going to set this aside after it's done. And this is going to be my chocolate sauce for a couple of weeks. But one thing to remember is when you are frosting the cake has to be completely cooled at room temperature. Otherwise, the frosting will slide right off the cake. So you want to let the cake completely cool. And then while the frosting is still warm, you're going to pour that on top. Now, if you want to have a frosting that pours more easily, maybe it's a little thick for you, you can add a couple tablespoons more of the heavy cream, and that will loosen it up a little bit. And then you can really pour it over. You can pour a thin layer on first, and then let that sit, come to room temperature, and then you can rewarm this and pour another layer on. So you can do it that way. But I just poured it right on and spread it with a knife, and it was lovely. So here is our cake. Why don't we take a couple of pieces right here? I'm going to add that, serve that with whipped cream. My husband likes it served just with sour cream or even yogurt, which is nice. So you can do that. But there we have our silver palate, the chicken Marabella, which it's been a long time since I've had it, so I was really excited to have that one more time. Actually, we're going to have it a couple of times. And then our chocolate cake, which is a no-fail chocolate cake. Really easy to keep these recipes in your back pocket. And before we go, do we have any other questions before we say goodbye?
I think we just have lots of yum yums.
Okay, all right. Well, listen, I hope you guys will join me again for our May class. Please go to AARP New Hampshire to register for that. By then, I'll be a grandmother, and if I get permission, I'll get to share a picture of my grandbaby with you. So I want to thank you all for joining me today. I hope I'll get to see you in class again next month. Have a wonderful beginning to your spring season, especially those of us here in New England who just finished. Our snow is still melting, but we want to wish you all a wonderful beginning to spring. So thank you all for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Liz. I so appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you'd like to learn more about any of AARP's other virtual offerings, please go to www.aarp.org/nh. And I've put a healthy living URL, and the website is on the chat as well for you to look. So thank you so much, and everybody have a great day.